Mother Knows Death presents External Exams with Nicole and Jemmy.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mother Knows Death. Today is our 100th episode, and to celebrate, we are having a special episode with the host of Body Bags podcast, Joseph Scott Morgan. You may know Joseph from his frequent appearances on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, Court TV, and other major news outlets, or as the author of Blood Beneath My Feet, The Journey of a Southern Death Investigator. Joseph holds a Master of Forensic Science degree from National University and is a board-certified fellow of the American Board of Medical Legal Death Investigators. Currently, he's an associate professor of applied forensics at Jacksonville State University in Alabama. Joseph started working in forensics in the 80s, and throughout his career, he's been involved in thousands of medical legal death investigations and autopsies. Please welcome Joseph Scott Morgan to Mother Knows Death. Hi, Joseph. It's so exciting to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. It truly, I appear on a lot of podcasts and chat with people. I feel like I'm talking with a colleague right now, and so that's really cool for me. A different kind of colleague, but a colleague just the same. It's an honor to be with you and to chat with you and your audience.
Thank you. I think I'm so excited to speak with you because there's not really many of us that do autopsies anymore. So when you get to meet someone that does the same thing that you do or has done or whatever you're doing right
Yeah.
now, that it's so exciting that you get to kind of talk shop because there's just a
Yes.
limited amount of people that actually do it. Maybe we should talk about a little why autopsies aren't as common as they used to be.
I don't know if for my little slice of the pie, just from my perspective of what I observe, because I'm a college professor now, and I have kids that I know you've had this happen for you. I've had kids that they come to me and they beg and they plead, Professor Morgan, can you please take us to an autopsy? Can we go see an autopsy? And when I was their age and was getting started in the field, there were any number of places you could go. Coroner's offices many times would welcome you, ME's offices, and even hospitals. But now, one word, lawyers. That's what I think it comes down to. I think it comes down to liability. And it's tough to get people in the door. I don't know that hospitals in particular are doing as many autopsies as they used to. Hospital pathologists always they always kind of had a reputation that they would prefer to spend more time in front of a scope than being down and doing, the actual gross dissection of, the remains in total. And, my career as a death investigator kind of leached over into that area because I would go around to private hospitals and the pathology groups, and I'd say, look, I'm looking to pick up some extra change. If you guys want me to go in and do this autopsy for you, and I can report what I see, cut in all the tissues, do everything for you, organ weights, dimensionally, do everything for you. If I see anything, I'll call you. And they would prefer that I didn't call them. And so it was a great opportunity for me to sit at their feet and learn, because it's always a learning opportunity.
It's kind of nice when they don't call you, right? Because then you really get time alone with the body to look at things. And that's how I feel. Like I would say if I see anything different, I'll call you. But that gave me time to really see what was normal anatomy and what was, looking crazy without someone else down your neck, breathing down your neck,
Yeah, and you feel like you've got, that you're the apprentice and they're the master, and they're standing over you, hovering about. Good and well they don't want to be there. I still have yet to come across a clinical pathologist that just, gee whiz, I wish I could do an autopsy today. That's just
I know
not
a couple that really, yes, they're the best.
And you've got a much broader scope than I do. So, and I'm comparing them to forensic pathologists.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
Because the pathology residents that I used to teach, the only ones that were really interested in doing the actual autopsies were the ones that ended up going into forensics. So,
Yeah, and there's certainly no limit on those. Isn't it interesting? Pathology from a physician standpoint, I think is I say this frequently. It's like the only medical training that one can go through, and the more training you get, the less money you make. And so, if you're going to become a forensic pathologist, um, y- you're going to start out as a government employee. That's the way that happens, and you can develop a private consultancy and do very well. But that has its hazards along the way. I can discuss that, for people that are curious, because I have people that reach out to me because I cover all the true crime stuff and they know my background. They're like, "A lot of families, can you recommend a forensic pathologist to me?" The problem with that is, yeah, I can recommend them, but as we say down here in the South, there's rare as hen's teeth. You don't, you can't, you can't find them very frequently. You probably find, and I'm talking about a board certified forensic pathologist, not somebody that is a pathologist that claims they practice forensics. Gulf of difference. It'd be easier to find a neurosurgeon in most places
yeah, people don't
than
realize
it
that
would be a forensic pathologist.
they're like the most
Yeah.
highly specialized doctors, right? People just don't realize that.
Yeah, yeah, they are, and they've left the traditional clinical world behind. I mean, we in forensics, we have our own clinical, dynamic. Obviously, we're examining bodies, we're making diagnoses, and we're assessing, labs that come in. Lord knows histology is a big part of what we do, and obviously tox, and then just standard panels, with everything, that walks through the door, well, rolls through the door, because um, I've never been a big fan of partial autopsies. Um, I'm I'm of the opinion once you break out the cold steel, everybody should go through, because you're running too much of a risk by only doing a partial autopsy. There was a whole group of people for a long time. I remember that you could have, for instance, a self-inflicted gunshot wound suicide case, and they'd bury bodies with bullets in the head. I've never been a fan of that at all. And I've seen that happen over and over and over again. And a lot of times I think that it's because of expediency. But it's those cases that you're going to wind up giving a deposition on because somebody's going to get in a twist over it, or new evidence will be being covered in the future. And, in forensics, if you don't do it out of the gate, that body is going to wind up in one of two places, either buried and vaulted, uh, and having been embalmed in most cases, or cremated. And so now you're looking for evidence in a case. And a great example I think that I covered for years now has been the Tammy Daybell case out of Idaho, where you know she presented early in the morning. Um, Her husband found her dead on the floor. She had some kind of frothy cone that her children actually came to the house, her adult children, and visualized. It was issuing forth from her nose and her mouth. And most of the time, we're only going to see that, if we see it a lot in drug ODs, particularly with opiates. And you see it with asphyxial deaths. And of course, he was later found guilty in her case, in addition to two children that he killed, her husband, that is. But here's the thing: the coroner rolled out to the scene, and they made the determination then that she was not going to have an autopsy. And this is a 49-year-old woman that famously had been training for a marathon. It's not like she's debilitated,
Yeah.
like God called, and suddenly she's gone. And you really run the risk if you're the medical legal authority and you decide not to do the autopsy. And I don't have much patience with people saying that the family didn't want it. It's when you're in a clinical environment, and at least this is my assessment, families will come, I think, to the clinical environment, that is the hospital environment, where there's a known natural, pathology that's going on. and they will say, "We want an autopsy." Most of the time, they're going to have to pay for it unless there's some kind of overriding interest the hospital has for either research or maybe, liability. They want to do it, and they'll compel the pathologist to do it. But in the medical legal world, we try as best we can. I promise we really do, to be as compassionate with the families, that we try to extend as much compassion as we can and take everything into consideration. But when you're faced with something that might wind up being very dark, very, very dark, and you just have that gut feeling. I don't go on gut feelings. I'm a scientist most of the time, but you get that feeling about a case. It's like we really need to do the autopsy on this case. Family's going to protest. Well, you go in and you make your apologies, because the authority of the coroner, the medical examiner, generally going to trump any of the family's wishes. Now, they can retain an attorney and they can get an injunction, and we've had that happen before and those sorts of things. But I think that it's probably in the best interest, certainly, of the courts and the community for the autopsy to be performed.
You're making me think of a vintage case of Mary Jo Capachny. Does her name sound familiar to you? The
Oh, yeah.
Ted Kennedy
Oh,
Chappaquiddick
yeah.
situation.
Chappaquiddick.
But when they pulled
Absolutely.
her out of the water, they just were like, "Yeah, she drowned."
Yeah, no,
Next.
and
No autopsy.
yeah, and famously that case, for years and years has gone. There have always been questions, and I'll go one even better. And Lord knows I don't want to go down a conspiratorial rabbit hole. However, I extensively last year covered, and on my podcast, I spent time talking about the Kennedy assassination, and arguably they had, yeah, I could safely say probably two of the biggest incompetents on the face of the planet
Oh yeah.
that they turned that precious man's body over to, after a homicide. He was a homicide victim. Doesn't matter that he was president. There were no rules, no laws in place regarding assassination investigations relative to the president until like 66. This happened in 63. So he's a homicide victim that took place in Dallas County. And there was a forensic pathologist, Dr. Rose, who had done all of his training up in Iowa. And he famously attempted to prevent them from removing the president's body from Parkland. And there's eyewitnesses saying that they pushed him against the wall, put their hand on their weapon, and said, "His body's going with us." And he's like, and he was newly, and here's the interesting intersection here. I love history. He was the first medical examiner they'd ever had. Texas does not have coroners, and they have medical examiners, but did you know that the justice of the peace in Texas is the de facto coroner there? It's an interesting little law, and you'll find those all over the country. But my point is that you had this man who turned out to be a very highly esteemed forensic pathologist that saw gunshot wounds regularly. And he was at their disposal, and they put the president's body on that plane and flew him back to Bethesda. And he was under the care of two people that they were they were pathologists, not forensic, had never done a forensic case between the two of them. And you're talking about obviously the biggest forensic case in, I don't know, I guess you could argue U.S. history, because it's still impacting us today as we speak right now. And so his body is turned over to these people, and did it in front of an audience. There's some estimates there were probably 30 people in the autopsy suite. Little or no accountability. Chain of evidence was not intact. You actually had FBI agents sitting there taking notes, and they couldn't believe what they were seeing. It's interesting, isn't it, where it seems the more high profile a case gets, the more fingers get in the pot. And many times I believe that if you will just allow these experts to do their job to begin with from Jump Street, there'll be well, many less headaches in the world, and again, I can't emphasize enough, we're still paying the price for this.
I feel like that I say this often. We call it in the hospital the VIP treatment
Yeah,
because when they come into the hospital, a person that's famous or high profile or anything, it just starts off with them getting a fake name and
yeah,
the mix ups and the special treatment. And normally you just get your specimen thrown on a bag on the countertop, but now you're just someone brings it down to you and it's getting handled specially. It's going on the machine that for histology faster than it normally would. And then this is when mistakes happen because you're not just
right.
letting people do the proper procedure. And it happens all the time. There's so much documentation of it.
Yeah, and anytime someone is allowed to, isn't that interesting? Even after death, people jump in line or cut the line,
Yeah.
and you start acting outside the norms, the acceptable norms of what your standard procedure is. Anytime you deviate from that, there's a price to be paid. And when it comes to the courts, when you deviate from your normal SOP, that's a real problem if you're trying to prosecute a case or and I don't care either way, even though I'm a medical legal death investigator by trade and a forensic practitioner, I'm neither pro prosecution or pro defense. I want the answers. I want those black and white scientific answers and let everybody else sort it out at the end. I'm not about seeking justice and all. There's enough people there on that train. I like my little space in my train. My little space in my train, we'd love to make scientific discovery and hand it over to everybody. Here, you can take a look. You can take a look. You can make your own assessment, but this is the judgment that we've made. And going back to Kennedy, one of the really interesting things I think that people might find fascinating about the Kennedy case is that when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, Dr. Tom Noguchi, who is arguably one of the most famous forensic pathologists, American forensic pathologists ever, and he was referred to as the coroner to the stars. This kind of goes along with what you were saying. But, stars were not for him. He had done Marilyn Monroe. He did John Belushi. He did uh, Tate LaBianca. He was physically at the scene at those cases. But he also did the bums. He did the homeless people, the unknowns, all the serial victims that had come through during the 60s and into the 70s and the 80s. He was no respecter of persons in that sense. He viewed everybody the same. And when it came time, in this one exception, and this is a good exception, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, I think it was the Ambassador Hotel, Dr. Noguchi said, okay, this is what we're going to do. First off, no one is going to be allowed into the autopsy suite unless I allow them in. Because as you know, our field is so small, news travels fast.
Yeah.
And back then it was even smaller. He only allowed the technicians, the photographer, and fellow forensic pathologist in that suite. And he personally invited one of the forensic pathologists, the guy that headed up the ballistic section for the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which, by the way, no longer exists in its old construct. It was back then considered the medical examiner for the armed forces. They did a lot of the ballistic studies on cadavers and that sort of thing years and years ago. Anyway, this guy headed up that program. He's a forensic pathologist, boarded. They invited him to fly out to LA. And so Noguchi had witnessed everything. And this is a real touchstone moment in history, forensic history and forensic pathology in particular. He was so impacted by what had happened to Kennedy. He was like, well, it wouldn't have happened on my watch, but by God, if that ever happens here, I'm going to have eyes on this thing, and it's going to be documented from stem to stern. And he did a great job of that. But guess what? There are still tons and tons of conspiracy theories that surround Bobby Kennedy's death. How much more so if you look at his brother, where you had two people that had no background in forensics doing that autopsy. Now you've left the door open even wider. So,
Well, that's what
you
happens.
know,
People, one thing, you give people doubt, and now you see it happening in modern day right now, even that you just don't trust anything because of the
no,
way things were handled, right?
you don't, as far as you can throw it.
And it's interesting that you were talking earlier about how students can't observe autopsies anymore. It's just very difficult when you think about back in the day, there was audiences watching these autopsies. And
Mhm.
I think that now that's part of the reason, at least I've seen in the hospital, because I've been in the hospital system now 25 years around the autopsy. And I saw it when I first started that I was able to have, if there was a student that was interested in being a nurse, they could come observe the autopsy.
Right.
And I do think that that's important because you should really understand every aspect of life and death if you're dealing with live patients or not. But
Yep.
I saw that to having med students all the time, and then at my most recent job, they just wouldn't even let medical students in to watch the autopsy. They were like, "Only essential personnel that needs to be there."
Yeah. It's a terrible state of affairs. I can't speak about your experience, but I can talk to you about mine. Um, I don't have the same clinical, academic experience that you have, having come through a pathology assistant program. My master's degree is in forensic science, and so I was a true real life diener. You know, the old term that they would use for autopsy assistant, which I think is German, roughly translates like servant of the dead or something like that. And I was proudly a diener because I learned from a lot of really talented old guys, guys that, I could tell you stories about them taking a striker saw and doing beveling on the skull cap. And so they could make it perfectly
Mhm.
lock and and they could do it quickly because they had to deal with such a volume of cases, guys that could use a handsaw to take a calvarium off where,
That's
if we
hard.
were
It's
tasked.
hard.
It is very
I
hard, and
know
if
from
we're tasked with it,
experience.
it would take us hours, but these old guys that were so uniquely trained where if you had an agitating striker saw, it was a luxury for them. Can you imagine the first one they ever got? And I know this seems a bit out in the
They
weeds
still
perhaps, but
they still suck and break all the time. It's like
yeah, they do, and, it's that weld, right at the axis right there that always fractured for me, and of course, the blades are you'll buy the body itself, the body of the saw itself, and it's kinda like buying razor blades. Uh, they'll almost give you the handle, it's the damn blades that cost so much over a period
yeah.
of time. But, I think back from my experience, the autopsy suite, by far in my field as a medical legal death investigator, hands down, best classroom I've ever been in my life. Nothing compares to the experiences I had in the autopsy suite. And dealing with everything from just starting out as a scribe for the forensic pathologist and I still have visions of all of those clipboards lined up on a table and having 5 and 6 bodies laid out and ready for the pathologist to walk in. And buddy, when we're rolling, we're hitting and getting it, we're going. And some case might take us an hour and 10 minutes from open to close. And then you might have some young person that has died of some mysterious circumstance where you think that it might be natural, but there might be other issues. And then you might have, I don't know, and this is not uncommon, you have somebody that is morbidly obese and they're shot multiple times with small caliber weapon, and you have to track all of those rounds through the body and document that as you're doing it photographically. That case can take sometimes 4 or 5 hours, not to mention the x-rays that come along with it. And so the reason I'm saying this is that everything that I did in the morgue, and I think I wound up doing close to 7,000 autopsies over the course of my career. Everything I did in the morgue translated to the field, and the reason it translated to the field so well is that I was the eyes and the ears of the forensic pathologist, and forgive my language, I'd had my ass chewed out enough that I knew what they wanted in the field, and that would translate to me clinically in my brain when when I was observing a body at a scene, whether it was a homicide, a suicide, undetermined, industrial accident, it didn't matter. I knew my pathologist like the back of my hand. And I could say, okay, for this particular pathologist, they're going to want this, this, and this, and they're going to want to know why I didn't get it if it was not obtained
So
at the
you're
scene.
exactly like a PA,
Yeah, I
just
mean,
in a
and
different kind of circumstance.
yeah, it is. And so we have to do things with trace evidence that you guys probably don't
No.
do, and nail scrapings and nail clippings, and doing rape kits, and swabs for DNA, and I mean, you name it, printing the dead, and then dealing. I think one of the probably for me, you get used to it, but bodies in advanced states of decomposition, um, because if you get past the grotesque nature of it, which eventually you do, um, there's so many other hidden hidden um, hidden secrets within those bodies because of decay and the obstacles that that presents for you if you're trying to do an assessment of the remains or what remains of the soft tissue that's there. Because it's I hate this term because it's thrown around a lot, but it is nuanced. It's nuanced by the fact that are they in an early state of decomposition? Is it a moderate? Is it advanced? Is it like super advanced where um, you've got skeletal remains that are visible, with kind of a bit of soft tissue still left over, stretched over, where your knee's going to be. Am I going to have to cut the jaws out of this person? Am I going to have to clip their fingertips off and shoot them with tissue builder in order to get the fingertips to swell up so I can get a print off of them? All of these little things that you have to learn how to do, and you have to learn to do it on the fly because you move at such a rapid pace. If you're at a big medical examiner's office, there's not time to kind of linger and think about it. Um, Starting my career down in New Orleans, I love this, by the way. The ER nurses and the ER physicians in particular, I developed an affinity for them because I'd always go to the emergency room because I'd have so many traumatic cases, gunshot wounds and motor vehicle accidents. So I got to know them a lot. And so we had faculty members there from LSU and Tulane Med, and they had a theme. And for a while, they had it up on the wall in one of the emergency areas, and it said, "See one, do one, teach one." And so you've seen it, now go do it. Now the next person up, you have to teach it to them.
I love that.
Just imagine that. And that's really the only way you can deal with the volume, that's coming in. It doesn't mean that just because you've seen a lot of cases that you're smarter than anybody else. Far from it, because there are people that work in rural areas that have seen things I can't even begin to imagine. But there's something to be said for volume. You it's not a drip. It's steady parade of bodies coming in.
Yeah, and you get a good representation of pathology and just it is interesting though when you're in different areas how you see different injuries that are more common in that particular part of the country. And then like I was writing about a case recently of a town in Africa that sees a lot of people who get stabbed in the eye. And that's not something
Really?
that really happens that often in America, that you wouldn't see those
No.
wounds commonly, but in that particular gang, that's something they see more often. So,
Wow,
it's cool,
that's
like
very interesting
yeah.
finding. Yeah, you don't see that a lot. I've had it with overkill before with stabbings, but it was a very impassioned kind of thing. Like there was generally some kind of underlying sexual tone. I'm going to rip you to shreds so nobody else will have you. But you're right. That type of event is very rare. Where you would have somebody attacked with a sharp instrument in the eyes.
And one of the cool things that I love about autopsy is that it just like I'll do as many as I can for the rest of my life because I always will be able to see something different at some point. You just see, even if it's just like a normal anatomic variation or something. Someone's got two
Mhm.
ureters, and one time I just found a horseshoe kidney by accident. It was the greatest day of my life.
I know, mine too. I had the same experience, for horseshoe kidney, and as a matter of fact, I wrote about it, not too long ago, and a piece that I was working on, and, I was with my mentor, who's passed on now, God rest his soul, Bill Donovan. He's actually from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and, transplanted down here in the South to go to college and became probably arguably one of the best forensic scientists I'd ever known. And I found, we were working on a case and I came across a horseshoe kidney and I'd never seen it. You know, it was amazing to me. And I said, wow, check this out. And he was like, yeah, it's a horseshoe kidney. I said, never seen that. He says, well, go ahead and dissect it out, and I'll grab the camera. And so I held it in front of my face like I had
Oh,
a
that's
big
cool.
handlebar mustache. And, that's typically, kind of how we would, that was like a treat for us to do something like that. And the cool thing about it is you never know. And I don't know, maybe I'm I've always been occupied the space in the world of the dead, but I'm also kind of sentimental, I think, which is a dangerous combination. Um, and one of the ways I would look at it is that every opportunity I had to do an autopsy, I would think to myself when it wasn't going fast and furious, I would think, you know what, this is really cool because I'm seeing something that no one else has ever seen. We talk about going to the depths of the ocean or going to space or climbing a mountain or something like that, but literally in an autopsy suite, um, you're doing an autopsy on somebody, you're opening this space up and it's being viewed. You're viewing the space for the first time. And that's kind of an odd thing when you think about it. It's a unique thing, and then once you begin to do the examination, you're going to find these little anomalies, like the horseshoe kidney. And I got to tell you about a really cool case that one of the things that really stuck with me and will for until my final breath. I had I'd spent time in the Army Guard, so I had an affinity for old soldiers. And when I started my career, there were still a lot of World War II vets around. And actually played golf with a World War II vet when I was like maybe 23, 24. He only had one arm and he could play golf.
Oh, wow.
He was an amazing golfer. He couldn't hit it any further than about 120 yards, but his swing was so grooved with the one arm that he would always put it in the middle of the fairway. Neat man, lost his arm in South Pacific, and just he didn't let anything bother him. But I was on duty as an investigator with the coroner's office. I had split time. I worked as an investigator at night, and I worked in the morgue during the day, and that's the way you did it back then. Very tiresome. Couldn't do it now. I got a call from a nursing home, and nursing home deaths are not normally reportable to the coroner or medical examiner. Nursing homes or back then they weren't, and hospice cases. But they called me and it's like, yeah, hey, how are you guys doing? Why are you calling me? I said, yeah, we've got a death of a gentleman here. And he's literally this would have been, I think, in 88 or 89. And said he has been under the constant care of a physician since 1946, like in a retirement home or in a nursing facility. And he just died. I was like, okay. And said, well, he sustained a gunshot wound. Well, I was like, okay, I'm interested. What's the story? And, because with homicide, it's true, there isn't a statute of limitations. Doesn't matter how far out it goes. And it turned out that this guy had fought as an 18 or 19-year-old at the Battle of the Bulge.
Oh, wow.
So on that frozen ground in Western Europe, Belgium, some probably equally young German soldier took his Mauser bolt-action rifle, loaded it with, I think it's a 7mm round. I think that's what they fired. I can't recall. And took aim and shot this young kid from New Orleans when he was 18 or 19. And it was superior to the umbilicus. And the round tore through his bowel and lodged immediately adjacent to, I don't know, his the I don't know if it had the upper lumbar region, I think, and technology was at a point, and they had such a volume of cases that they were able to stem the bleeding. They did a bowel resection on him, if I remember correctly, but he was essentially paralyzed from that level of his body down and had remained in that state. So this is a young man, the bloom of youth, as they say, never got to have a family, never got to have babies, and he had languished in this bed for these many years. And obviously, if you can live this long in a nursing facility, somebody's taking good care of you. Um, and I remember having him on the table and, his tiny atrophied legs, he's withered in appearance, beautiful mane of gray hair that was combed back. Um, his dentition was intact. He'd been taken, well, he didn't have bed sores, which is a rarity, and to have been in that long. And we did x-rays on him, and you could see that round, and it was deformed, and it had the bone had fused around it, and it was just this kind of ossified chunk that was adjacent to his spinal column.
Yeah, imagine how much
And
pain that would have caused.
I know it, and I really often wonder how much pain did he experience throughout his life and just endure it like that. And I remember taking the saw and gently cutting around it and removing it, and it was one of those weird kind of experiences where I literally held history in my hand for a moment. This is a battlefield artifact that I'm holding, that some faceless kid on the other side fired this weapon at this other young kid who probably in his mind, I don't know, probably in his mind, he didn't think he was going to get out of there, but he did get out of there. And then he's thinking, what kind of hope did I have in the future? What was going to happen for me? And here I held it. And I want you to know the pathologist that I did the autopsy with, he ruled the case as a homicide, interestingly
That's it.
enough.
I was gonna ask you that because I had a case once that I had a guy who was a Vietnam vet that was shot. But I don't really think he died. He had cancer and stuff. He had another cause of death. But when I called the ME and told them, I was like, "I'm just calling you to report this. You can take it if you want. And they're like, "We don't care. We like we
Yeah,
don't need
I
that."
know.
But your case is a little bit different because his death was ultimately caused by consequences of that initial gunshot wound. So it's really interesting.
It was fascinating to me, and I'll never forget it when he signed when he primary cause of death was let's see, I think it was multi-system failure secondary to uh, gunshot wound from the distant past. Part 3 was gunfire by unknown enemy combatant,
Wow.
and that was so weird.
Yeah.
It was so weird, and they ruled it as a homicide.
Yeah, that
And
is
I
really
just
cool.
being there, for that and actually being the one to retrieve that, as the old pathologists used to refer to it, retrieve that missile. That's the way they would refer to a projectile back then, to retrieve that missile. And I remember we turned it over to the state crime lab, and they retained it, and it was just part of history. And that just goes to the point, you never know what you're going to see. And back to our earlier thesis here, the idea that people are not having the opportunity to come into our environment in a world that you currently inhabit and that I inhabit, because it's like gold to me. I mean, it's like gold being found on the ground. It's so sad. I've done autopsies. I remember down in years and years ago, I used to assist with the state medical examiner in Georgia. I was assigned to the state medical examiner there, and I'd have to travel a little bit. And I would go about 60 miles south to Macon, Georgia, which is home of Mercer Medical School. And I would, I'd only do weekends, but it was a busy shop because you might have, after a Friday night, and cases come in from the surrounding area from the other counties, we might be looking at 16 cases in one day. and we would literally have medical students from Mercer Medical College or medical school outside the door waiting for us at 6 o'clock just to get in because they didn't get to see enough pathology. They didn't get to see enough gross anatomy. They didn't have enough bodies back then to go around. That's terrifying.
Oh, wait,
And
I'm gonna tell you the most outrageous thing right now. So I went and did an autopsy last summer, and there was a medical student there, and he was in his 4th like, almost getting ready to get a residency. He was telling me where he was applying and stuff. He looks white as a ghost as soon as I make the incision, right? And I'm just like, "You okay, dude? You gonna pass out? Like, we good?" And he told me that he did not see an autopsy or do gross anatomy because of COVID. Like, what?
how's that even?
I don't know. I
I
was mind blown.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had like this kind of weird moment. Actually, it was just yesterday. I'm teaching actually a section. I teach a section called a class that I created years ago called Medical Legal Death Investigation, and I teach it at Jacksonville State in our forensics program. And I was trying to educate my class. These are all undergraduates on lines of Langer, and uh, and I try to tell them from the perspective of like a contour map, because most of these kids have never had, human anatomy, certainly not at the level, even at the upper levels of undergraduate. And there's a reason why certain incisions are made in the body, and because if you go essentially against these contours, almost like going against the grain, you'll get these nasty, nasty injuries, surgical injuries as a result. And I was telling them about the position of an appendectomy with the primary side, the McBurney incision, and how it kind of runs in this weird diagonal way. And 20 years ago, I would have had students in the class looking at me going, "Yeah, I've had an appendectomy." Well, now all the appendectomies are done laparoscopically.
Mhm.
So you lose what I'm saying is we're advancing now to the point where I've heard of medical schools that were gonna go all digital with their anatomical studies,
Oh,
and I'm
yeah, I've heard
thinking,
that
"This
too.
is utter madness that you would do this," because the tactile the th when you stick your hands into that world, the tactile nature of that, you're learning through your fingertips. I don't care how much AI there is or whatever, you'll never learn like this. When you slip on those surgical gloves and you're holding things and you feel that weight, you feel the weight of a lung that has pneumonia, and or you hold somebody's heart with cardiomeg, or you've got a fatty liver, or cirrhosis, and you feel those nodules, or you run your hand over the pleural surface of the lungs and you've got the tiny blebs as a result of emphysema or whatever it is. There's something there's something about that that translates to the brain, and it's going to be lost. It's going to be lost, I think, in this world that we're heading into with AI.
I know. It really is a shame, and it scares me to think that these people are actually going to be responsible for people's lives because it really is the only way. And I saw the transition when I was working in surgical pathology because I was the lead PA and I was in charge of training the residents. And one of my biggest things was I wanted all of the residents to do autopsy rotation first because I was like, they'll see how all the bodies are inside or all the organs are
Logical,
inside
yeah,
because it's just different than gross anatomy.
yes,
It's different when it's fresh. And then because what happens was they would come into surgical pathology and they would get something called a Whipple specimen, which is a pancreas with a piece of the duodenum attached. And they wouldn't even know how it sat in the body
mhm,
because you just get this organ with a giant tumor in it that's like plopped on a cutting board in front of you.
right,
And it's hard to make the relation of how it sat in the body, which way is anterior, which way is posterior, things like that. So, I
yeah.
definitely think that is something that all medical students should be heavily involved in for sure.
Yeah, there's a reason, as grotesque again as this is, there's a reason that people would risk prison relative to uh, grave robbing. You know, our predecessors understood the value of having as fresh as specimens as they could. Great story. If somebody gets a chance to check this out, and I can't remember, I can tell you where it happened, but this would be right up your alley. There was a case a few years ago that took place actually in Georgia, and it was then the Medical College of Georgia, which is a pretty highly esteemed, one of the oldest medical colleges, medical schools in the U.S. Um, and there were, this is in the antebellum South, and so there were these two freemen. These are African Americans that are not slaves that made their living uh, from robbing graves for the medical school. Well, there are no, there were no even crappy fluorescent lights back then. You know, they did everything by whale oil lamps and those sorts of things, candles. These guys would be paid, right, to go out, dig up the fresh dead, bring them in. The medical students would pay them. Some people think that it was actually some of the instructors that were paying these guys to rob the graves because it was kind of a traditional thing that had gone on. They'd have to do it in the dark of the night because it was illegal. You know, you were not, it was considered to be very inappropriate to do this back then. I think people are surprised at that. Anyway, after the students were through with bodies, and after they had completely dissected them, they would take them and push them off into an ossuary that was underneath the buildings. So they're doing renovations on this building in
Oh
the
my gosh.
late 80s or early 90s, and there have been entire papers written about this event. They found human remains, and remains should be emphasized here for the plural nature of that word. Because they got into there and there were commingled skeletal remains that were just piled under there.
And this was
And
in
it was
Georgia?
yeah, it was Georgia Medical College. I urge anybody, please don't believe what I'm saying. Go and look it up. And I think can't remember the lady's name. She's pretty well known back then. Pretty well known forensic anthropologist, had to go in and try to make sense of what was going on because you know we'll handle mass graves, particularly my friends that are overseas. I made the acquaintance. I just recently took a trip to Great Britain, and I made the acquaintance of a lady who's a forensic archaeologist, and she's doing exhumations in Spain that are in part of the research they're doing on Spanish Civil Wars, and they had mass killings back then with big open graves they were dumping bodies in, and she's exhuming those remains right now. It's a nightmare because everything's stratified and commingled. It's in a graveyard, so they have buried newer bodies on top of these bodies, so they have to remove those bodies and then go down to the substrata. So anyway, I'm sorry, I digress, but that story is it was always fascinating to me, the links that people would go to because, you know, they understood that if they were gonna be treating people, um, that they needed they they needed to be able to understand form and function. And all the clinical stuff is great, you know, where you're making diagnoses of the living, but if you don't understand our status as the dead first, um, it it's a much more difficult proposition you have before you, being a future clinician, I think.
Did you hear about this recent case where a surgeon took the wrong organ out of someone? It just
No,
happened.
I've heard of other cases. I don't, and I can't remember how recently the most recent one. So no, I'd have to say no, I
Oh,
didn't.
this guy took out someone's liver instead of their spleen. Didn't realize it at the time of surgery, sent it to surgical pathology, labeled spleen, and in surgical pathology, they were like, "It's his liver, and that's why he's dead."
How could it?
It's
How,
so outrageous.
how could a surgeon do
I
that? I mean,
He said it migrated to the other side of the body, and
what
I don't know. I just I can't. It happened in Florida. It was a couple months ago.
is this
I'll
a
send
potential Florida man story? I don't know. That's what this sounds like. Everything's different in Florida. Wow, how much more so? I really thought you were going to say he took out the wrong kidney.
No,
You
it's
know, that's I mean, I can see that happening. You know, but the liver? And it was supposed to be a splenectomy?
Yes.
That's outrageous,
It
absolutely
is,
outrageous.
and the fact that he's trying to say, "Oh, it migrated," and it's like, yeah, of course, if you have hepatomegaly or splenomegaly, they get bigger and they move to the side, but the attachment points are on completely opposite sides of the body.
Yeah, I don't understand how one goes about doing, and it was not just part of the liver, it was the entire
Yes, the
liver?
entire liver.
Holy I beg you, please, if you have any links relative to that, I gotta read
Oh,
this
yeah, I
because
wrote up a
and
whole
I'd love to
dissection
know the
about it.
status of this man. I would assume that the patient is
Oh, he's dead.
deceased?
Yeah, he's dead, he bled out or
I'm
bled
sure
in.
that he did. Ho and the fact that you would if you're hang on, I'm trying to do the calculus here. If you're so if you're going to remove a liver, there unless you're doing it for harvestation and the person is, essentially brain dead, there should be another liver standing by that you're going to upload to this
Oh,
person,
yeah.
and the fact and how I don't see how things could have gone that bad. Um, Amazing. Yeah, I've gotta read this. I can't wait to read
I
it, as a
just
matter of
don't
fact.
understand, like, when you remove the spleen, you're only cutting it off of a splenic artery and vein, right? It's just like a little
Mhm.
clippy. You could kinda take
Yeah.
it out with your hand, honestly.
Yeah,
Uh,
you can bluntly dissect it,
yeah,
yeah.
like, a liver is multiple attachments, portal
Yeah,
system.
it is. And,
It's
I
crazy.
spent many hours, particularly with, rather rotund alcoholics that had cirrhosis, fatty liver, and would have these livers that were just absolutely gigantic. Probably just trying to remember, the largest liver I've ever taken out. Numbers don't come to mind right now, but it was like the size of a Volkswagen bus. I mean, it was so big. But I spent a lot of time wrestling with the dead over their livers because it's oddly positioned, and as you said, there are multiple attachments that are there that have to be cut through. It's a very robust organ, and so when you get in there and you're trying to trim this out and dissect it out so that you can get it up onto the board intact without it being ripped, which is something I always try to avoid doing. Try to keep the capsule intact. Um, it's a daunting task many times, particularly if you're tired and you've done a lot of cases, and this is, the 5th or the 6th one that you get to. I always think that it's better to start off with the largest person first, if
They're
possible.
the worst autopsies.
Everything seems a bit easier after that. But yeah, liver is by far for me, um, probably the most difficult organ to get out of the body. It took me a long time also. I I I would always do it by feel, removal of the adrenals. That took a while to locate them, but I got pretty good at it toward the end where I didn't have to, like, actualize it. I could just feel and trim it out, put it on the board, then next, go to the kidney, the adjacent kidney, so forth and so on. I've been in environments before where, um, we were doing on block dissections where, we refer to it as tongue to nuts. In the, forgive me again, that's very crass, but, you know, starting, dissecting out the tongue and just shaving right down the spinal column, all the way down, cut away the diaphragm, all the way down to the rectum, remove it. Males, you're taking out the testicles. And I think probably the quickest one of those I've ever done was right about 2 minutes.
Oh,
That's
I
how
believe it. It's a
and you
bitch
just
for the
get
person dissecting the organs off of that block that you hand them.
yeah,
But
but
that
some doctors that you work with
they
prefer to
do,
be on
yeah.
block, and generally it's not desirable in forensics. Generally, it's an organ by organ dissection. The Rogatansky thing is like I always felt like it was more clinical. There are certain circumstances where they do want it, and lots of times it has to do with, not gunshot wounds, but, accidents, particularly impacts, posterior impacts,
Mhm.
blunt force trauma of the rear. They wanna see little focal areas of hemorrhage in their natural anatomical orientation and stuff that they cannot appreciate if you're doing it organ by organ. They wanna see it posteriorly. So, that was, that was daunting. I think probably the most daunting thing that I ever had to do in the morgue is try to remove, to take out the brain and spinal cord intact.
Oh, I know, from the back.
Yeah, it's hours and hours and hours. Tedious. The most tedious cases by far, though, that we would do, and you have to do these on a regular basis, are in custody deaths. And a lot of people don't realize this, but even if it's someone that dies in police custody of a heart attack, you're going to get what we used to refer to as a prison autopsy. And a prison autopsy is, first off, there's no area of the body that is not touched by a scalpel blade. So, like, for instance, the back is completely dissected out, completely opened. You take photographs, exterior. Then after you open the back, you're taking pictures, detailed pictures of all the musculature, all the way up to the occiput. We would just kind of peel back this way. And then the reason is we'd cut down the buttocks, down the posterior legs, open those up, the calves, the soles of the feet, if you can imagine this. And people say, my God, this is horrible. Why would you do that? Well, they're in custody. And so one of the things that you have to do with in custody deaths is you're checking for any focal areas of hemorrhage where they could have been abused. And again, it goes back to the adage, if you don't get it right then, you'll never get it. And so we would do palms of the hands, backs of the hands, up and down the arms. Funeral homes hated it because it was an extra level they had to go to if the body was going to be viewable. A lot of hats involved, wearing hats and, trying to make the body presentable after we did it, but that's standard. I've assisted in autopsies of 3 execution victims. I did one of the last electrocutions in Georgia, I think, when I was assigned to the GBI, and 2 of the early lethal injection cases. And here's an interesting little bit of trivia, because a lot of people will look at that and they'll say, well, why do you do an autopsy on that? Well, it's a homicide. And that's not a homicide. What else would you call it? There's only 5 manners of death. It's literally the death of someone
At the hands
of another. And so the coroner can make the decision as to whether or not they want an autopsy, but the public is going to be best served if all of these autopsies are done to completion, where they are as thorough as they possibly can be. And isn't that interesting, because you've got somebody who's been sitting on death row, everything they do is monitored, everything they do is watched. You have detailed information about their medical history, if anything they're suffering from, but yet the state still requires that there be an autopsy performed. I had a chance for one to go and observe the execution, but I got to tell you, man,
you draw the line there.
well, my brain is so loaded with from all of those years of dealing with death. I never, as a practitioner working in 2 really big areas, you never get to say no to death very often. If you're on duty,
Mm-hmm.
you have to do its bidding, because death never stops. There were actually 2 invitations I had because the state medical examiner would be present for the execution. It's something I just didn't want to load my brain up with. I didn't need to go in there and bear witness to it. And be around, you're around enough sadness as a medical legal death investigator. I spent a lot of time. I think I've done close to 2,000 in-person death notifications over the course of my career, and it's soul crushing. The last one was just as bad as the first one that I did when I think I was 21 years old. Never got easier. And so you look at something like that, and a lot of people out there would say, God, I would give anything to be able to go see an execution. Be very careful what you wish for. There's just certain things there's enough horror and ugliness in this world that you don't want to have to subject yourself to that one other thing. So it's just something I chose never to do. Now I was there for the examination, and I think clinically you can kind of switch that off. but you almost feel like if you're there watching it, you almost feel like you're a party to it.
exactly.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's just kind of and I know a lot of people get bloodlust going on. They see these horrible cases in the news, and I'm chief among sinners because I cover them. And you say, well, if that was my relative, I'd throw the switch, or I'd push the needle, or I'd do this and do that. And that's all fine and good. But, you know, it wasn't my relative. I'm not invested in this. Um, I'm not invested in this emotionally. I don't want to be invested in emotionally. I'm not even invested in it clinically to watch the process because I know how it ends. I'll be glad to be there to document it, even though it's rather tedious. But it's one of those moments in time, that I'm glad it's one of those turns in the road that I'm glad that I
Yeah.
didn't take.
You don't
And I didn't
regret
go.
not.
I didn't go to.
I'm
go
curious
to.
about this actually. So, do you do obviously you do normal documentation of autopsy, but do they use that information for anything? For example, I'm of the mindset that a shooting squad is probably the most humane way to kill a
It
person,
is. Yeah.
and you.
I've thought that too. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
like when they see this pulmonary edema and seeing signs that a person was developing reaction to whatever lethal injection they were given, do they take that into consideration as far as?
I would hope so, and I'm glad you mentioned that because I did an episode. I'm gonna get it wrong. I'll just say a couple of months back. I live here in Alabama. My university, Jacksonville State University, is here in Alabama. Love this place. Uh, the whole population of the state is smaller than the entire population of Atlanta. So we're sparsely populated here. I love it. It's beautiful. I'm up in the Appalachian Mountains. Um, y'all didn't hear that. Don't come here.
I know. I'm like, I'm gonna go buy a house there right
It's
now.
it's so peaceful. But anyway, um, our state did the first nitrogen execution a couple months
Oh
ago,
God.
and it had only been used in veterinary medicine for euthanasia. The only animal that I could find that it had been a success with were hogs. Uh, they did it with dogs, and dogs um, uh, presented with marked anxiety as a result of, and I think that a lot of it had to do with being masked up because the contraption that they use, I urge anybody to go look. It's just like I tell my students, don't believe anything I say, go look it up for yourself. That's generally how you're going to learn. But the mask that they utilized is like, well, your husband, who by the way is an absolute hero,
Thank you.
um, is a firefighter. So they have to use those all-encompassing face masks,
Mhm.
right? Where they can take oxygen directly in, it protects their face. That's the type of mask they're using on this
Oh
dude.
my God.
And he is morbidly obese. As a matter of fact, they had attempted, it was either 1 or 2 lethal injections on him already. They couldn't hit a vein
Oh my
because he
God.
was so obese. And it didn't work well. Um, it was allegedly a struggle because it's an oxygen. I don't know if you can call it like an oxygen deprivant, but it's a oxygen replacement. It's not like halon with halon fire extinguishers where it's sucking all the oxygen out of the air and fire dies. It doesn't quite work like that, but it's oxygen replacement. And you're replacing it with nitrogen. And there have been a few, and I've worked these cases. If people in the audience are not familiar with what are referred to as final exit cases, uh, there's a book that was written many years ago called Final Exit by a guy named Derek Humphrey. Not Humphreys, but Humphrey. I think that's correct. And he had started out years ago. His wife had really aggressive bone cancer, and she was, as you know, that disease is really insidious. And she was just, there's no position she could get in and not be miserable. And there's not enough drugs you can give someone to make them comfortable. It's a horrible way to die. they decided a mutual agreement that he would make tea for her. He would make tea for her, and he used, I think, some kind of barbiturate combination. I can't remember what it was. And she died, and he witnessed it. Well, he went on from there and wrote a book about it called Final Exit. In Final Exit, he goes through detailed information describing how you can go about peacefully, and they don't call it suicide, they call it self-deliverance. So the reason I tell you that story is that, going back to the execution with nitrogen, one of the things that they would recommend, and for a while on YouTube, there was actually, there was a video that was up of him demonstrating this, utilizing a kid's helium tank like you would rent to blow up helium
Oh my
balloons,
God.
and how to change the hardware out on it, you know, using plastic bags. It was horrible. I mean, just absolutely horrible. And this method of self-deliverance, you would take on board drugs and then, use the gas as an adjunct. And either way, it's going to bring about your peaceful death. I worked a number of those over the years, and I didn't see struggling with those like was described relative to the nitrogen execution. However, he was not given meds prior to it either. So he's placed into this. So you know that he's going to have elevated pulse. Blood pressure is probably going to be up through the roof. Terrible anxiety, crushing chest pain probably already as a result of that, shallow breathing. And then you add the nitrogen into it. And I'm not saying that the guy didn't deserve to die. It's capital punishment's not my thing, but I have objections based on, my Catholic beliefs. But the state says he has to die, and this is the methodology. The problem is that with this particular methodology, I didn't see any evidence that it had been tested other than on hogs. And that's a big leap to go from hogs to humans at that point in time. And my understanding is, I think that within the last month, they've just done another one with nitrogen, and I haven't heard the outcomes on it yet.
So interesting. We just talked about this on the podcast a few weeks ago, that there's these new nitrogen pods for countries that have it
I
legal,
saw it, yeah.
physician assisted suicide. Although I don't even think it's physician assistant. The person goes in and they push the button themselves, and
Yeah.
it
Yeah,
sounds like a horrible death. Like asphyxiate to death sounds terrible to me.
Yeah, and these pods look like something out of the television series Westworld or something.
Yeah.
It's, kind of it looks like a sleeping pod like you would see on some John Carpenter, alien movie where you lay down, they put you into deep sleep, right? Interestingly enough, this is about as deep as it can go. I think that the case, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, this up in I've never been to Switzerland, I always want to go. But the northernmost portion of Switzerland, there's like this little peninsula that kind of juts out into northern France and over around Germany. Anyway, this thing was out in the woods. They had set this pod up, and this person goes out there, and I don't even know what their diagnosis was. I guess they had a terminal diagnosis. I don't even know if that's required anymore. But they went in and took their life, ended their life in this thing, and the authorities were investigating it. I think the way the Swiss had described it, I think they said this is so crazy. It was not approved. It was not government approved, so it didn't have the stamp on it or whatever. And they got all in a
imagine
twist
if you
about
got
it.
called to that scene. Some death investigator had to go.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I mean, it's not like with final exit cases, and it wasn't just me, and it's not just my 2 officers. These cases, trust me, they were everywhere, all over the country. There was it was almost like a fad, that took hold for a period of time, and it kind of ran parallel to the same time that Kevorkian
Yeah.
was doing his thing. And interestingly enough, the book itself is called Final Exit, but it was published by the Hemlock Society, which, of course, hemlock is the tea that, was it Socrates drank, where he was forced to take his own life.
Mhm.
And it's published by the Hemlock Society, which they are a society, I guess they're still in existence, I have no idea, that was dedicated to this idea of self-deliverance. Um, so yeah, the world of medical legal death investigation, you can get off into all of these interesting areas that and be exposed to things that most even cops never see, because we're doing investigations that, yeah, some of them run parallel, but cops are really only interested in homicides. That's the only thing that's prosecutable. So everything else, and we work homicides, obviously we have to, but we're interested in suicides and accidents and natural deaths, which I love working because it's so intellectually stimulating. I'd always learn something by digging into medical records or certainly undetermined deaths, that are out there where you just have no rhyme or reason why this person died. And so that would pop up on your radar.
Yeah, I mean that's why we started this podcast, because I feel like there's this heavy field of true crime podcasts, and
Mhm.
there's this whole other world of accidents and suicides and just
There
other
are.
things surrounded around death that people don't really talk about, that are actually, I mean, accidents and natural death are more common than homicides for sure, and most people could relate to those more if you think about it.
Yeah, they can. And I'd say less than a lot of this is going to be geographically dependent, but um, probably right at about 1% of all of the deaths that coroners and medical examiners investigate are homicides. Most locations, suicides outpace homicides 2 or 3 to 1. So you spend a lot more time working suicides than you ever do homicides. And there's enough if you watch the news, you think that there's people walking around with machetes, cutting people's heads off all over the place. And yeah, there are really violent crimes that are out there, but you're seeing what the media chooses for you to see. It's these really and there's a lot of homicides that never make it through the news cycle. That's like one of my big problems with like the Jean Bonnet case. Um,
That was
I've had
driving me
people,
nuts during COVID with the ticker that was on on the
yeah,
news, because I'm
no,
just like, "Come on," like, we had so many people die at the hospital every day, you just don't even think about it, you know what I mean?
no, you don't. And that's the sad thing about it. And going to those cases in particular, still waiting for a lot of the data, the postmortem data. My suspicion is that probably there were not a lot of those cases that were autopsied. And I'd really like to know, I'd like to see that data relative to those cases because it's certainly a unique time in human history. And I'm hoping that from pathology standpoint, it's been very well documented. But, you know, there are a lot of things that never make it into the news. Um, and one of the biggest examples, I think, is Jean Bonnet. She fit a certain demographic. There's been over, I don't know, I'm speaking out of school now, but at one time there were like 26 books that had been written about the case. I'm sure there's probably more by now, not to mention any number of treatises that are out there floating around. But I worked, I worked a lot of cases involving little girls that died, and they never made it through 2 news cycles,
That's
and those
terrible.
cases are unsolved. So it's all, um, the media sets the table for what we're going to be exposed to and what we hear about. That, going back to true crime, that's one of the interesting things that we do now because we're unfettered, I think, by standard newspapers and certainly the nightly national news. Um, I find cases for body bags, which I try to stick within the lane. My lanes, I don't get off into relationship stuff. I'm not putting on makeup while I'm telling ghastly stories and all that sort of stuff. I'm not sitting around smoking cigars and drinking whiskey while I'm talking about it, though I do like a nice whiskey and a good cigar.
I was like, "You
Uh,
probably could get away with that."
I might could, but you know, I like to talk about those cases where my my friends, I don't like to call them fans. I like friends because um, I view them as students too, because, I've been very blessed. I've got a great education. I got it all in my own hand. I mean, I didn't have anybody, but I do have an education. There are a lot of people that are sitting at home right now and they watch true crime television. they don't have the same opportunities I've had. They haven't spent time in the morgue. They've never been to a death scene. They've never been around some of the brilliant people that I've been exposed to over the course of my career, and they never will because their paths are not going to cross. They're the people that keep everything running and do the hard work that that I don't have to do because I'm a college professor. I really don't have a real job. I'm a college professor. I used to have a real job, but so it's my opportunity. I despise it when people speak down to folks. I really hate that, and I've had that done to me. But I had a few really kind people, mentors along the way that were forensic pathologists that didn't treat me like I was their servant,
Mm-hmm.
like a diener.
Yeah.
They treated me as though I were their student, and they wanted to invest in me. And so I try to pass that along to the general public and try to take these, pretty high end, complex scientific constructs and try to break it down so that they understand it a little bit better and still, weave a good tale along with it. And they come away understanding some of the stuff that can be very confusing in the news, if you just kind of slip over the top of it, just kind of, pay a passing glance to perhaps. These people have never been in an autopsy suite. Most of them never have. They don't know what the sounds and the smells are like, what it sounds like when you drop a scalpel on a tile floor and it rings off of the cabinets and off the stainless steel fixtures. They don't know what that's like in there. I do. That sound still resonates in my ear. They don't know what it's like to have flies coming off of a body and lighting on you. They don't know what screams of families are like. I know what that's like. And so I try to do my best to translate those experiences, and also the joy of it, of actually discovering something scientifically among all the sorrow and among all the horror, that there's something that you can take away from it that people will be invested in. And so I'm very grateful for the opportunity I've had, to do body bags. It's just every time I do an episode, I'm thrilled with it. It might not be everybody's cup of tea, but I enjoy talking about the mechanisms of death and how you would work a case like this in the field and then bringing it back to the morgue. And probably one of the coolest things that I've covered that will one of my greatest joys is we did Julius Caesar's autopsy. It's the first documented autopsy that was ever conducted, and how his personal physician actually created a 3D wax model to demonstrate to the crowd of what had been done to their king, to Caesar. And when he demonstrated this thing in the forum, which is where we get forensics from, he had it on a pedestal. They describe it as an unknown mechanism that would cause this thing to turn. And so he could display it to the gathered crowd. And they said that you could hear gasps go up from the crowd. And they wanted blood at this point. They wanted blood. It had been a witnessed homicide with these senators laying up, but when the people saw what had happened and that was the first time, not only was it the first documented autopsy, but what's old is new again. We use 3D modeling now, in court. And
Yeah.
that was the first time. And that was a couple thousand years ago that he thought about that at that moment in time. That scientist, that physician, that clinician thought about this time. How am I going to convey this message to these people that don't have my understanding necessarily because they haven't spent their time treating patients? How are they going to appreciate this? I got it. He
Yeah.
has this eureka moment,
And I
and he
think
creates his model.
I get that from when I listen to, because I trained interned at the medical examiner's office for a couple months, but nowhere near have any kind of experience like you do. So, and I don't really feel like I know it all that great, but when I listen to you on your podcast, or when I listen to you on Nancy Grace, or any interviews you do, I'm always like, yeah, this guy is like explaining it to people on a normal level so they could understand it. I always like to say it's like a third grade level.
Well, I'll have comments, and I don't go around reading my reviews. I did early on. I understand that's a slippery
Don't do
slope
that.
to get on. Don't do it. But, I had somebody say, you don't have to, we're not stupid. You don't have to dumb it down for us this much. Well, I'm glad you're so brilliant.
Yeah,
Some people don't
exactly.
have the same advantages that maybe you have in your life. If you don't like the way I do it, I'm sure you can go find somebody else that'll do it. But this is the way I'm going to do it because, look, you never know that little corn seed that you plant in somebody's brain. They may have for years, and this is the way I look at my students too. For years and years, they may have been told that they're no good at math, that science is hard. And yeah, math is difficult, science is hard, but the reward is almost immeasurable. The knowledge that you gain. And if you can plant that little seed in their brain to help them understand, okay, form and function, this is how this works. It's kind of like when that's why our forensics program is an applied forensics program because we're trying to teach and train people. Academics hate it when you say the word train. Uh, when you're trying to educate people so that they can go out and be practitioners, that's the beauty of it. It's not theoretical forensic science. It's applied forensic science. And so those kids that I have walked through the door, many of them have been told that they're no good in math or that they're no good in science. And all it takes is just a little shove sometimes and a little encouragement. I mean, I think all of us can identify the first time that we ever walked into a chemistry class, perhaps in high school, and thought, they might as well be speaking in ancient Greek. I don't understand this. Oh, they let me put together models of molecules. How revealing is that? But then you start to talk about quantitative findings relative to suspected cocaine, that's recovered at a crime scene. Suddenly you understand the application of chemistry.
Yeah.
And, the lights go on at that point in time. And sometimes that's all it takes. That's why the STEM stuff that they do in colleges now is so very important, and in high school as well.
I know exactly what you're saying. I mean, I went through this when I was a teenager. I got pregnant with my daughter, and I dropped out of high
Mhm.
school when I was 16. And I was kind of deemed like, oh, you're not really smart. You don't know anything. Like, why don't you just kind
What a
of,
shame.
And it's you just have to find somebody that talks to you and doesn't treat you like you're an idiot to
Right.
really find that light inside of you to help. You know what I mean? To help get you on your way. And I think it's cool because one of the things I noticed when we went to CrimeCon, actually one of the things my husband noticed first, he was just like, "There's all women here. It's all
Yeah.
women." He's like, "This is so crazy." And I think just being a mom and a wife myself, that a lot of
Yeah.
times, like Nicole's third and fourth on the list of who gets the attention. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm running a house. I'm making sure his career is going well. I'm making sure my kids are all in school and doing well. And sometimes I'm on the back burner, but there's some situations where women, they get married and they have kids when they're in their 20s and they never get to go to college but they probably would be really good forensic scientists, right? But they just don't have the opportunity, like you were saying. And the next best thing is for them to listen to podcasts like yours to kind of feel like they're doing the job a little bit.
It's vicarious. There is this vicarious element to it where, you know, you can brush up against it just enough and you're not going to have to come home. You know, Kim, my wife, who you met,
I love
she
her, by
thinks
the way.
she thinks the world of y'all. Uh, she goes on and on about y'all and the time that we had there. And my wife is she's retired now. She's a school teacher, taught school. God bless her for so many. We were so happy when she retired. God bless all school teachers
Now,
out there right
right?
now. I
I
don't
would,
know how they do it.
yeah.
I wouldn't. You couldn't chase me fast enough anyway to give me the job. But to give you an idea of kind of the world that I inhabited as a practitioner, um, I compare myself and my colleagues to the great apes, where if you've seen stuff that the researchers have done, where they've got the videography and the the apes will go about picking nits out of one another's scalps, they're eating them, they're looking through. When you work at a medical examiner coroner's office, you live in such an alternative world. You for instance, one of the things that we do for one another is we sniff one another, and people don't understand that because just because we've gotten in from a case doesn't mean our day is over with. We might have to go to court. We might have to go out and grab lunch. We might have a meeting we have to attend. And so we would walk by one another and they would say, and it's very common for somebody to say, well, how do you smell? How do I smell? And that question is not like, smell this lovely perfume or cologne that I have on. It's, I don't smell anything. I think you're good. And what we're smelling for is that we had to deal with so many decomps that when you go into that environment, the elements of the, and this is kind of a, I think it's kind of a metaphor as well, but the elements that um, they're attached to death, they attach to you. That happens physically.
Yeah.
Um, facial hair,
I was gonna say we had a guy, one of the medical examiner's office when I interned, he always smelled like decomp because of his beard.
always, yeah. And it's one of those things. I was in a Piggly Wiggly refrigerated truck with bodies from a capsized oil service vessel that were coming in day by day. They were trying to outrun a hurricane or a tropical storm, and the thing capsized, and they all died, and we didn't get them all on the same day. We're trying to get them identified. They were all in their underwear for some reason. Nobody had any ID on them. Had to cut the jaws out of every one of those bodies. These bodies are coming out of the Gulf of Mexico, so they're swollen and bloated. And no matter how many baths, how many showers I took, I love a shower. I love a good shower. And back then, my hair was really dark. I had this great Tom Selleck-like mustache.
That's great.
Big, brown,
You need to
thick,
post some pictures of the old school days.
I do. Everything, and I wrote about this in my memoir. I look like a cancer patient. I wound up having to, I was so weary after that event, and there were other things that were happening too. I wound up having to shave all of my hair off, shave my mustache off, even shave my eyebrows off. And that seems nutty, but it had affected me to the point where you become neurotic about it. Plucking nose hairs out, all these sorts of things. And it sounds so absurd, I know. But that's the nature of what you do when you work at a medical examiner. When I would get home in the evenings, I would always have to come in through the rear entrance of our home through, we had a mudroom on the back of the house where the laundry is and all that stuff. And
Kim's like,
Kim would
strip.
meet me. Yeah, she'd meet me at the back door, and she would ask me, not, "Hey, babe, I love you. So good to see you." She'd say, "Did you have a decomp today?" And that's an interesting, when you think about the position that you put your spouse in. It, you know, you're there, and you're leaving this world of death, which is what you always do. It's not like being a homicide detective. It's not what it's like at all. You're death. Day in, day out, 24/7. You are seeking out the dead. You're trying to understand what happened to them, no matter the circumstances, homicide, suicide, whatever. And you literally bring that home with you. And so, my wife I had a spot in the mudroom. I'd have to strip all my clothes off. She's a saint. She's a saint. She'd bag them all up
You
for
don't
me.
want that smell in your house. You
You
want to
don't.
come home and not have any association with what you just did. It's a very
No,
hard line.
it is. It's very hard. And it had gotten so bad at the end of my career, where I wound up working for 20 years, as a medical legal death investigator, and then I transitioned into academia. And I've been doing it now for 20 years. So I'm really old. But I look back now at that very young man who had no business doing what he was doing. Somebody was willing to take a chance on this uneducated kid. I had no education. I just had tenacity.
Hmm.
I kept coming to the morgue, volunteering in the morgue. Who does that? Mopping up the
I
morgue,
would.
mopping up maggots, and then finally, the first day, I'll never forget, one of the most exciting moments of my life is when the pathologist looked at me and said, and I'd been scribing for him for a while. I'd sit over on a stool. I had my own scrub suit. I'd sit on the stool, and I would sit there, and I had actually a scrub suit and what they used to refer to as a sectioning gown, which is it's a green gown that ties on the side
Oh,
over
yeah.
here. And it looks just like a scrub suit. And I would faithfully wash it, and I would scribe for him. And then one day he looks over at me and says, "Do you want to close?" And I thought that he meant go get my mop and mop up everything here, which is what I was doing. It's not what he meant.
He was like, you could
It's
sew the
like, do you
body.
want to close?
That is
Yeah.
exciting.
And it really was. And I knew how to hold the needle. I'd been watching, but until you put it in your hands, until you feel that tension on the skin down near the pubis for the first time, and how much force it takes to push through
It's kind of
tissue.
unbelievable, right?
It
Can't
is. It's a
believe how hard
surreal
it
moment.
is.
And tying it off, and then start with a baseball stitch, and you're going up, and I remember being terrified I was going to stick myself, which I did multiple times
Of
over the
course.
years, and cut myself and injected myself and did everything else. But I look back at that time, and it was invaluable because it's something now that, I can pass on to my students. I can pass on to my friends that listen to Body Bags. And my wife and I now, we think about the tears that were shed, all the dead kids that never had a voice, the stories I would come home and tell her. It would make us hug our babies even tighter, appreciate those moments. And many times I would fail to appreciate them because I was so obsessed and worried about having to go back to work. I'd work 4 days on, 10-hour shifts. Of course, 10-hour shifts always turn into 13-hour shifts. And it had gotten so bad at the end where I would pick up my keys at the end of my last watch that I was on. And the moment, Nicole, that I walked out of the door of the ME's office, I was thinking about having to come back here in 3 days. I wasn't thinking about, gee, I'm going to go home and be with my family. I was thinking, I've got to come back here in 3 days. That's no way for anybody to live.
No.
There's no way. No.
When I interned there, it was nice. I was there for 3 months and I learned a lot, and I got to cut my first body on a decomp and all this stuff. But like I thought to myself, I can never work here full time. It's just not for me. Seeing people that didn't know that they were going to die that day, and I
Yeah.
can't deal with. I don't know. I did a lot of autopsies on fetus and infants and even children when I rotated at the children's hospital, and they all had medical diseases, that you're just like, they had this and they couldn't do anything to save them. But when you see kids dying in accidents and just abuse and stuff, I just was like, I can't do this every day.
Yeah, it wears
Mentally.
thin after, the kids in particular, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it's like, okay, you look at it on balance and you think, what good is coming out of this? Well, from a clinical standpoint, if I identify some kind of genetic anomalies that I can pass on to the family and say, okay, you guys really need to be aware of this.
Yeah.
This is what we found. I mean, what a redemptive moment that is, and amongst all of that sadness. But who am I going to interdict with somebody that starved their kid to death?
I know.
I mean, yeah, they'll hook them up on charges, maybe. Are they going to stay in prison? No. Are people going to stop starving their kids to death or, beating them to death? No, they're not. It's going on right now as you and I speak. Somewhere out there's a kid being abused. There's kids going to wind up dying. It happens all the time. There's nothing that we do that's going to stop that. And that's why I think there's a certain time where you have to be an adult enough to realize, and you have to swallow your pride and say, I can't do this anymore. It's going to kill me. It's going to kill me. It's going to kill my family. And it's a baton death march, where every single day that's all you're bearing witness to. And the human spirit's not intended to do that. It's not like working in a funeral home, where, they'll say, well, we're here to serve families and provide. You're there to sell a casket, and you're there to dress things up and make it that way. And that's all fine and good. People need that. People think they need that. God bless them. Godspeed. But, when you're in the field and you're working as a death investigator, it's hard. When you can no longer find redemption in it, that's the time you need to walk away from it. And I'm glad I didn't completely go over the cliff. I'm glad that I was reined back in, and my wife supported me in that, because she went through it, with me. She saw it all and smelled it all, and, would hear about these stories that it's like I often tell people a lot of stuff that that I saw and that I did, if you and I wrote a script together, Nicole, and we walked into some producer's office in Hollywood, they'd say, "This is too outlandish. I'd never
Oh,
believe
yeah.
it, and we're not gonna sell it." There's no way anybody would believe the story, you know? But, yeah, and there's a million of the stories out there like that. It's not just me. I'm a very small little guy. I just happen to be in the field at these particular times. Right now, there's somebody out there, right now as I speak, that's climbing under a house with a maggot-infested body. They're laying next to the body as they examine the body in a dark, you know, damp area that no one has been in years and years. Um, and there's people that are observing things right now that we can't even begin to fathom. Out here in America right now as we speak, they're out there doing this job day in and day out, and nobody ever thinks about it. You know, my first date that I ever had with my wife, we'd gone to a Braves game, and we went out.
Oh,
It was a
Braves, we
blind date.
can't talk. This is the only thing
I
we're gonna disagree on, Joseph.
well, I'm not baseball's really, I mean, I'll watch it. It's not
Okay,
really my
I'll
thing,
forgive
but,
you.
we went to a place called Fellini's Pizza, which is, everything's named Peachtree in Atlanta. I was working for the Emmy by this time. I left my job in New Orleans, which is my hometown, and then wound up taking the job in Atlanta, and she was a school teacher, and, we were sitting there, we had a pitcher of beer, and we were eating pizza, and she looked at me and said, uh, "Now, what is it that you do for a living?" I said, "Well,"
Well,
I said, "I'm a death investigator." She said, "Do you mean like a cop?" I was like, "No." I said, "I'm the eyes and the ears of forensic pathologists out in the field." She said, "I thought they'd go out there." I was like, "No, forensic pathologists don't go into the field. That's a Hollywood fiction." And they might go, but
rarely.
you you don't want them out
No.
there because they don't know how to process crime scenes. They don't have, you know, they're good in the morgue. And so I'm their eyes and ears, and my colleagues are too. So that's what we go out and do, and we notify families of deaths, and then I work in the morgue and, you know, all these sorts of things. And profoundly enough, and that she didn't really think about what she was saying when she said it. This is a first date. She looks at me and says, "Until I met you, I never thought about death." It's like, wow, I'm not gonna have a second chance here. Got to make she's beautiful, you know, she's sitting there and, and I was thinking, you know, uh, well, I lost this one. I'm not gonna have a chance. You know, she's making quotes like that. "I never thought about death until I met you."
Oh my
I've told that
god.
stories a number of times, but it's a little slice of life for me that, because death had become my norm. It was my norm, and that's no way to live. You know, that's where death is your norm. And you're right. I'm so glad you didn't go to work for the ME's office. I can't tell you how happy I am that you didn't make that decision. I'm glad that you took your skills and applied it to truly helping people. I mean, like helping people with the diagnoses, the surgical diagnoses that you can make. You know, these specimens that are coming out, and you're taking a look at it, and what you're doing is like literally I don't know that people fully understand, you know, how valuable an asset you are. You know, when you're talking about looking at some tumor, and trying to make an assessment of this thing that has been excised from somebody's, you know, body, and they're trying to understand what's the course of action here. Your decision, your diagnosis as you're sitting at that scope is so valuable. And that I always wanted to be in that environment. I think that I secretly, uh, you know, harbored thoughts that I would eventually go to, what was it? It was either Duke or I can't remember,
Yeah, Duke
UNC, I
has a
think.
PA program.
Yeah, and I thought about doing the PA program there for a while. I used to hope that Emory would get one. I would have loved to have gone through that program and just do nothing but autopsies, not have to deal with families or just sit in a lab, you know, and it's not, I don't mean to be dismissive by saying that, but the peace of that. And, you know, we started off the conversation and it was so beautiful the way you put it about, and people other than you and I and people in our field are not going to understand that, but you talked about that peace that you have in the morgue with the body.
Oh yeah.
And that's a true moment of discovery in there. There's nothing that There's no crosstalk. There's no phone. It's just you, one-on-one with the body, grossly examining the body and trying to understand what happened to this person and trying to assess it in that moment and know that whatever you come up with is gonna be invaluable. And there is a real peace in that. Um, and you kind of leave that morgue area after you've done what you've done, you've cleaned up and you're headed back upstairs, and all of a sudden the noise begins to invade
Mhm.
again and all the static that's around you and everything. And there is truly a certain peace that happen. Most people want to stay away from the morgue. There are
Uh,
people that want to be there, but for the lion's share of people, they'll take the loop around the long way in the basement. If they've got to go to where are cafeterias in hospitals always next to the morgue? You ever notice
I
that?
don't know,
At,
but we
at,
had patients all the time, like, accidentally one time we had the
Whoops.
door. Yes, and I'm just like, "Oh my god," they would have been traumatized if they saw anything that was going on in that room.
They walk in and they're wearing, we used to call it a Johnny coat, the hospital gown, the Johnny coat, and they're pushing an IV pole and they put, "Hey, what's this door?" And they open it up and
You're
I
just like,
always had
"Yeah."
that, there was an internal lock that we could use, and it would always seem, I worked in some really old hospitals and the way they used to be designed, it, you would come walking out of the morgue at these hospitals and right down the hallway is the dining area, and it's where everybody went to eat for some reason, and the food was always tremendous, and nobody in there other than, maybe the nursing staff and people like that, they know that that's the morgue because that's where they take the bodies, when or the transport service, uh, take the bodies in there and, place them in a tray and leave them and leave. If But they don't know what's going on down there, in that little
No.
room, they have no idea, but yet the cafeteria is right there. And I have to say, I'm, not as a patient, but as a person that walks into a hospital cafeteria, some of the best meals I've ever had in my life were in cafeterias and hospitals. Uh, eh, but yeah, it's kind of hospitals in and of themselves are weird places. They're like little cities, little islands, and, there's a pecking order. A lot of people don't understand that, and, uh, pathology is generally out there, on a little island by itself. You have people that come in and out, and I always wanted to be a part of that. I would just scrape the surface of it, and, going into hospitals and assisting with private cases and doing temporary. That's how I got started. The coroner's office was being renovated, and we're using a brand new hospital to do our autopsies, bringing in decomposed bodies into a hospital autopsy suite. I remember those days. That would never happen now. Uh, but yeah,
We brought in an exhumed body once. That was pretty interesting, but
they
it was supposed to be a hospital autopsy, and the person got buried by accident, and then they had to get dug up, like, a year later because when they finally realized that the person didn't have an autopsy, the ground was too frozen to dig them up, so it took a
took
while. It
forever
was a
for
very
that to happen.
unusual case, but
They are, and exhumations in and of themselves are fascinating. I'm a history guy, so anytime I'm there to see a grave cracked open, and you never know. You learn a lot. You learn a lot about. First off, you learn a lot about the skill of the funeral director
yeah, for sure.
because if they don't do an effective job, you're going to wind up with a real mess, literally on your
And
hands.
this guy was underground for a year, and he just I couldn't believe it because I was really scared to have a person that has been dead for a year in the hospital because I
Yeah,
thought if that smells really bad, that's gonna permeate and people are going
uh,
to smell it, and you don't want people in a hospital to smell that smell, but he still had makeup on his face, it was insane.
yeah. I had a guy that had been in the ground for 16 years. He was an African American gentleman that was a pastor, and it came to light that his wife, get this straight, his wife may have poisoned him, and they thought that it may have been heavy metals, and so we did an exhumation. I'll never forget this. It's one of these moments in time. He was dressed all in white. He had a white suit, white shirt, white tie. He had red socks, and they put shoes on him, and he had red patent leather shoes on. I'll never forget this guy, and he had what had been in his lapel, a red carnation, and the flower was completely withered, but it had stained his
Okay.
lapel. And the only sign of change that had occurred with him was he had a large focal area of mold that had grown on his face. Other than that, he was completely intact.
So
No
cool.
foul smell. There was no water intrusion because lots of times with the vaults, you'll get uh, people don't realize this, but because you're subterranean, you don't know what's going on beneath the ground. And I think people think that bodies are perfectly sealed and they're dry, and they're not. It's a nightmare scenario. And so many times, depending upon the water table, if it rises, if you've got like flash flooding that occurs in an area, you'll get water intrusion in these things, and the caskets will literally float like this and then drain back out. And so you have to contend with that. And talk about the smell, they're generally with a truly well embalmed body. Um, I learned this from a forensic pathologist because for some reason, it really gave me the creeps the first time I did an exhumation to be involved in it. And I'd done a lot of other cases freshly dead. I mean, people that had just been killed in the most awful ways. But for some reason, I was really put off by an exhumation. The very first one, I'll never forget, it was a lady. And he said, "Come here, I want you to smell something." It's like, "Okay, it's not your finger or something." He's like, "No," he says, "Come over here, lean over next to her mouth and her nose and inhale." And I said, "Okay." And I pulled down my mask and like that. He said, "Did you smell it?" I said, "I smelled something." He said, "It's got almost a sickly rose-like scent to
Mhm.
it." I smelled it again. How do you tell if it didn't? And it had the body, with these embalmed bodies, if they're done well, first off, the texture is almost, I describe it to people, sometimes it feels almost like the surface of an overinflated basketball.
Mhm.
That's kind of how it feels. The tissue is very, very firm. And I have I have yet to have worked on an exhumation where it was like a decomp, where we had taken it out of a river or out of a swamp or out of a home. I'd not had that experience before. Every exhumed body that I'd ever worked, uh, the the bodies were fantastically intact. I've had a few where I questioned how well they had been actually embalmed, but so
Well, Joseph, I could talk to you for the next 15 hours today. It's been so nice talking to you, and I really
that's
hope that you come back and we could share more stories like this. And
Oh, I'd welcome it. I wanna offer you a personal invitation to come over to Body Bags. We would
oh, I
love to
can't
host
wait.
you sometime.
Awesome.
Bring Maria with you. We would love
Okay.
to chat with her as well. The door is open. We would love to have you come over and let's have a chat. We can continue the discussion and maybe dig in some cases that are out there and things that are, some fascinating cases that have got some medical intrigue to them, perhaps.
Okay, awesome. I have a couple in mind that I will let you know
Okay.
that I'll
All
let you know
right.
about. Could you tell everyone where they could find you? Obviously, your podcast, Body Bags.
Yeah, sure. First off, I welcome the opportunity just to tell people to introduce everybody to my university. It's Jacksonville State University in Alabama, not Jacksonville, Florida. It's jsu.edu, jsu.edu. And then Body Bags Podcast, I'm on iHeart, as well as Apple and Spotify. And there are a few other platforms you can find me on out there. And then I appear on any number of, Court TV and Law and Crime and News Nation. I'm on News Nation a lot, but primarily I do a lot of stuff, obviously, with Nancy Grace. I'm on her program, which appears on Merritt Street Media, which is Dr. Phil's new imprint. I do a lot of work with everybody's friend, Vinny Politan, who has a nighttime show on Court TV. He and I go back years and years, and he's a dear soul. So I like working with Vinny as well. So, I'm out here, knocking around most of the time. And, I enjoy just talking about the science of death and the science of investigation. So I welcome all comers. So come on over and we'll have fun.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much for being here.
You bet, Nicole. My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Mother Knows Death. As a reminder, my training is as a pathologist assistant. I have a master's level education and specialize in anatomy and pathology education. I am not a doctor and I have not diagnosed or treated anyone, dead or alive, without the assistance of a licensed medical doctor. This show, my website, and social media accounts are designed to educate and inform people based on my experience working in pathology so they can make healthier decisions regarding their life and well-being. Always remember that science is changing every day, and the opinions expressed in this episode are based on my knowledge of those subjects at the time of publication. If you are having a medical problem, have a medical question, or are having a medical emergency, please contact your physician or visit an urgent care center, emergency room, or hospital. Please rate, review, and subscribe to Mother Knows Death on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you get podcasts. Thanks.